it's nice to have interesting people come to your house. And I think that my theory is that they infuse this place with their energy. And there's a certain like kind of permanence to that I feel like with every guest that comes, like this place becomes better.
I like that.
And also I think just having people in your home, it makes them relax a little bit.
I think it makes them relax, and I think it makes them view you as, it makes it easier for this to be a conversation, because I'm in your home. I'm not just sitting back waiting for you to interview me like a reporter.
Exactly.
This is your home. How long have you lived here?
Since we built the house 2003.
So 2003, so you were still doing the lawyering.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I lawyered. I mean, I was slowly kind of weaning myself off of the law up until 2012. The last couple of years, I wasn't doing very much of it, but yeah, I was a lawyer here for the first several years.
And you'd commute all the way into LA?
No, I mean, at that point, I had opted out of the big corporate law firm life, and then I had a variety of different iterations. Like I was a solo practitioner, and then I had a couple partners for a while, and then I had a different partner. I had an office in Beverly Hills for a while. I had an office in Santa Monica, and then I just worked out of the house on and off as well. So, but also, you know, in those iterations, like I didn't really have a boss, so I had more flexibility. So it wasn't like the 9-to-5 type of commute. But there are people that live around here that commute downtown every day. Like I don't know how they do that because we live pretty far out there.
How far away is downtown from here?
It depends. It's all about traffic, as you know. It can be 2 hours or it can be 45 minutes, depending. But our eldest daughter, she's a sophomore in high school. She goes to a high school that's east of downtown now, and the commute is just too onerous. So we have an apartment that we rented downtown, and my wife and I split the week staying down there with her, and we're homeschooling the other one.
Good for you.
So,
I think that's the way
I mean,
to
both
go.
of them have been homeschooled on and off. And I know you have lots of ideas and thoughts about education, specifically college and all of that. I think we've talked about that before. Yeah,
although I'm just curious as a side, like probably the main question you're asked about this is the socialization. Because obviously homeschooling, she's going to learn more from you than in some crappy high school. But in terms of friends and socialization, does she get that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that comes up all the time. And that's something I worry about the least. Because our house is like, it's like a functioning studio. There's just people here all the time, like all different kinds of interesting people. So in terms of like social stimulus, like that's the least of my worries. I do get concerned occasionally about, you know, basically pure academics.
Oh no, I want to get worried about that. You know, how much do you remember from high school?
I know. It's basically just the programming of my upbringing that kicks up and creates resistance around it.
Like I always ask people, okay, I've even asked this to people who like majored in college in like European history. And I say, okay, when was Charlemagne born? And this is the guy who united Europe or whatever, as the first great king of Europe. And probably 95%, and by the way, we've studied it. It's been in textbooks every year since like 6th grade. And if you majored in European history, you should definitely know it. But 95%, I would say almost 100% don't get it right within 500 years.
Right. I definitely could not answer that.
I don't even really remember it right now. And I've even written about it, and I've asked it a million times, but I think it was around 754, give or take. But people will say 1400, 1300, they won't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, what else have we learned in school every single year? There's nothing else. I took French for 5 years. I can't say anything other than bonjour, and I can't even count. I can't even count to 10. And I took it for 5 years, including in college.
Right. What we do need to do, though, is reconfigure the priorities of education around learning how to learn and learning how to make decisions and learning how to interact with people, like life skills that transcend pure memorization. I mean, you were looking at Shane Paris's book here sitting on the table. He was in here the other day, and his whole thing about mental models was born out of this realization that nobody had ever taught him about the methodology of making good decisions. Like it's just, there's no course in business school or in college or in high school about that. And yet that's something that all of us need to do a zillion times every single day.
Yeah, not only make decisions, but avoid the biases that are like almost biologically built into our brains to prevent us from making good decisions.
Right.
You know, from an evolutionary point of view, there was a reason for it. Like if you were walking by a bush and you hear this rustling, you would start running because for good reason. Maybe there's only a 1% chance it's a lion and a 99.999% chance it's just wind through the bushes, but you can't take the chance. So you just run. But we end up we're staring at a screen all day now and we're getting those same instincts. And so we're making decisions based on those same, there's no lion in the computer, but like if a stock goes down a little bit and you're looking at the stock market, or if someone sends you an email you don't like, you get that same thing. Like, I'm going to just kill somebody or run. And you don't know that these are just biases that have been there for a million years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly true. And I've been victim to that many times.
We all are. You can't help it.
Yeah.
Like something in your body or mind is reacting to something in a visceral way. And so if you lean into that, there usually is some creative output that you could produce. So I remember one time, this is a crazy little experiment I did. I wanted to play around with what are formats to write an article. So everybody just writes and posts it on LinkedIn or their blog, and they write a little, 10 reasons to do this or whatever. And so I wanted to come up with, I've been playing around for 20 years, different formats of writing. So I said, I want to do something I never did before. And Donald Trump had just tweeted, I'm going to buy Greenland.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, that's really weird. Like, I didn't even know you could buy a country. And so I figured, okay, something about this feels weird, of course.
Right.
And then the president of Denmark, or the prime minister of Denmark, he tweets back, it's not for sale. And this is like the weirdest auction I've ever seen on the planet. Like, the president of the United States wants to buy this massive piece of land, and I didn't even know Denmark owned Greenland, and he's like, it's not for sale. So that also was a weird comment. Like, why did
Followed by the ultimate troll when Trump tweeted that picture of one of his hotels. Like, did you see that?
Oh,
like,
no,
saying, he basically tweeted like, I definitely won't do this, and it was a picture of like a Trump Tower, like on a barren like Greenland landscape.
That's so funny that he did that. And so I'm thinking, but I didn't even see that, which would have definitely set me off. But just these two world leaders like bantering in this way like this about, people live there, it's this huge piece of land. There's all these natural resources. How did Denmark end up owning Greenland? Is it from like Eric the Red 1,000 years ago? Like, what is going on here? And so I started to research it, and I thought, okay, there's some weird things going on with Greenland that I didn't know about. So I learned a lot about Greenland. And then instead of just writing an article, I had never done a Kickstarter before. So I decided to do a Kickstarter, so I said, okay, I'm going to raise $100 million so I could buy Greenland. Right. And I wrote and instead of writing an article, I wrote just all the reasons why I want to buy Greenland, why people should let me buy it as opposed to Trump or some other country. And then I had, with Kickstarter, you have to put all the rewards. Like, so I said, okay, $50, you could be a citizen. $100, I'll make you an earl. $1,000, you could be a duke, and I get carving out all this like acreage for people, and then I was able to list though all the reasons why I thought this was interesting. Like, there's all these rare earth minerals, and there's a company called Greenland Natural Resources, which is actually 100% owned by China.
Yeah, China.
So there's this another weird. China now is entering the picture,
right.
And so there's all these weird things I didn't know. I didn't know Kickstarter. And so this article, quote unquote, that I had now published on Kickstarter versus a normal place was starting to get shared everywhere. And so that was interesting for me. And then Kickstarter shut it down. And so they shut it down because I'm obviously not, people started donating money.
Right.
And Kickstarter and then GoFundMe, the same experience. They shut me down because I'm obviously not going to raise $100 million. So they have to pay all the chargebacks to the credit card companies. So it could be a big money loser for them. So they just shut it down. But then I had a second story, which is I was just shut down by Kickstarter and GoFundMe. And so the whole thing is, here's a little experiment. And I gained a huge amount from it without any cost to me. So I learned all this stuff about Greenland. I learned about Kickstarter. I'd never done a Kickstarter before. So suddenly now I knew how to do a Kickstarter. I spent some time studying best crowdfunding practices, and I learned about Kickstarter. And then I learned this new format I could write articles in, which was weird. And then I had a second story on top of it, which was that they censored me, and here's what happened. So just that small impulse allowed me to experiment in ways that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise and learn a whole bunch of things that now I can do a Kickstarter, or now I can speak intelligently about buying Greenland or whatever.
And it's super funny.
Yeah, and it's funny.
It's like, wait, what? Like, first of all, can a country buy another country? Yes or no? Can an individual buy a country? And what's interesting is that you got shut down, not on the merits of what you were attempting to do, but on kind of a side technicality, which was probably motivated just by extreme discomfort at what was going on. And them trying to figure out, like, we got to find a way somehow to shut this down.
Yeah, and people were like sending money in, like they were like wiring money in. And
the sheer audacity of the whole thing. You know, it's not dissimilar from, and I know you've talked about this as well, Richard Branson saying, give me, going to Boeing and saying, give me an airplane.
Yeah, no, that's a great example.
It's so ridiculous that they would do that. But there's something about where naivete meets audacity, an audacious, dream, and then some steps are taken, that's how anything amazing is created.
Well, there's so many layers of you can't do this involved in any creative act, because if people weren't saying, Rich, you can't do this, then thousands of other people probably would have done it by now. So it's kind of finding where people are saying you can't do this, but when you ask yourself why, there's no real reason. Might as well try it.
Right.
So, like with this, there's no reason why I couldn't start a Kickstarter to raise $100 million to buy Greenland, and I learned something. And all the times, like people say, "Oh, well, you can't start a podcast. Have you ever done interviews before or a radio show? Like, leave it to the professionals." No, I think I can do it. Like, why can't I do it? And I'll tell you another just quick experiment. It's not as interesting as Richard Branson. Richard Branson is really an interesting example because this is a 27-year-old guy who was a magazine publisher and had no experience with anything relating to airlines. British Airways had a monopoly in England on airlines. Heathrow only dealt with British Airways. And Richard Branson didn't have money. And he simply calls up Boeing and asks to borrow a plane. They give it to him. I mean, the details, I'm skipping over the details. They just lend him a plane for a year. Heathrow's like, yeah, you could use this one landing strip. We don't really use that much. Same with JFK. And suddenly he has a plane going back and forth. Like, I'm sure at every step of the way, people were saying to him, are you insane? But what does it hurt to ask? And then, of course, there's subtleties, there's skills to asking, and how did he ask, and all these things. He used skills learned from being a music magazine publisher, but still, it's this combination of skills with audacity, with, like, why can't I? And allows you to go forward on so many different things.
Right. I think both those examples, Greenland and the Richard Branson example, are illustrative of both of these books. The book that you have out now, Think Like a Billionaire, and the book that you have coming out next year called Skip the Line. Like, there are lessons in both of those examples that could be pulled from both or either of those books.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because let's say, well, let me ask you, when you were starting to run in marathons and then ultra marathons and Ironman things, and you were in your mid-40s, I bet you there were a lot of people saying to you, Rich, maybe you should just stick with a 6K or whatever.
Plenty of that. But I look at it as sort of the frog in the warm water that's coming to a boil slowly. Like, there is an incremental, like, sort of compounding path that you can take towards like an athletic goal that's different from, I mean, I guess I did skip the line in that I didn't do all that little stuff and I went right to like ultra distance and didn't pay my dues or didn't take that traditional route in that regard.
Let's not forget, you didn't start with 5Ks, then 10Ks.
But I was an athlete. Like, I can minimize it. But yeah, I guess for somebody not steeped in this world, it does sound like a little insane and ridiculous.
It was insane, Rich.
Yeah.
Like, you weren't an athlete then, right?
No, I had a past as an athlete.
Right, in high school.
But logically, yeah, like rationally on paper, like it didn't make sense.
And so, and yet, look what happens. You ran, I don't know the ultra iron, whatever, on every island of Hawaii, one day at a time.
Right.
Like, you did these incredible feats that I'm sure many people every step of the way kept telling you can't, but that's what put you on the other side where you suddenly, if you go past enough of, you can't do this, then suddenly you're the only one doing it. And so you were the only one in the world who had the kind of resources and set of experiences and set of talents that you had, where you were running in all these races, but you were also, going towards this vegan lifestyle. You had the experience of being a lawyer, so you were able to, you had a better capability of writing about all these experiences than most people would. So you were able to combine them all into being the only rich role out there doing these events, books, podcasts. There's no one who can compete.
Yeah, well, I think it's an example of having all of these skills in a variety of disciplines that I tried over the years that weren't necessarily matched up with like my ultimate talents, and certainly not my passion or a sense of purpose. That when they finally found the right outlet, it all like congealed to create, an amazing result. In the same way that, if somebody was to say to you, like, you don't have the credentials to be a podcast host, but many years ago, you did your 3 a.m. show, you learned how to talk to people, you learned how to create something that's entertaining, you are doing stand-up comedy, like you've been writing, all of these other areas, like all contribute to your ability to sit behind a microphone and be engaging and be entertaining and be curious, all these skills that you've developed over the course of a lifetime. I mean, I would say similarly, I took a million depositions as a lawyer. I learned how to ask questions. And I think that my true skill set as a podcaster was developed through sitting in thousands and thousands of AA meetings, listening to people tell their stories and learning how to tell my own story. That was my training ground for being a public speaker and being a podcast host. You learn how to be empathetic. You learn how to listen. You develop this great capacity for compassion for the human condition that I think lends itself towards creating a safe and interesting environment to explore those very themes with another person sitting across from you.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, because I think that does come across, like your compassion for your guests comes across so much in your podcast, I think because of your experiences. And, I always wonder about this idea that vulnerability, like the kind you experience in AA, the kind you experience in or one should experience in writing and maybe all forms of art, vulnerability sort of buys freedom. Like when you're vulnerable, when you are able to admit to what can go wrong, what has gone wrong with you in the past, the mistakes you've made, now you're free. Like nobody can say, well, you can't say this, you've done this. Right. And I said that. I'm an idiot a lot of the time. Bring it on. And you're free. You don't have to deal with people saying, well, Rich, you can't talk about health. You had this and this happen to you in your 20s. All right, yeah, read my book. It's in it.
I already told you about that. Yeah.
So you're free from all that stuff. And the more vulnerable, like how can people, attack that? They can't say, well, now you're not allowed to write about this because you experience this. No, there's no rules. And yeah, I'm just being authentic, and that allows me to be as creative as I want in this area. I'm creative even about my mistakes.
Well, your specific strain of authentic vulnerability was really a tipping point in your creative career. Like when you finally made this decision that you were going to be honest and write about your life and your experiences in a very transparent way. I'm sure there was a lot of fear that preceded that, but when you mustered up the courage to do that, that's really when things change for you.
Oh yeah, completely. And to the point that now I don't even, like if I'm writing something, I don't publish it unless I'm afraid of what people are going to think of me. And I don't try to say something I just ask myself at the end, right before I hit publish, am I really saying something new and unique here? Because I don't want to say something that everyone else has said. Or am I saying something where I'm really afraid, oh no, what are X, Y, and Z going to think of me? What are these people going to think of me? What are my friends going to think of me? What are my readers going to think of me? So I always have to double check myself, because if you're not afraid of what you're creating, there's a chance then that, okay, everybody else has done it because they weren't afraid either. Right. And so there's got to be some resistance somehow that you get over. Like even something I wrote recently, I was legitimately afraid, well, is this going to shed a new light on everything I've written for the past 10 years because I'm admitting to this other thing? And I was nervous, and correctly so, but that's okay. That's how you learn, is getting over that every time.
Yeah, when I wrote I think I probably told you this previously, but when I wrote Finding Ultra, like I really had to get into the mindset of writing in my private journal that no one was ever going to read. Like I had to get comfortable communicating things about my life that I'm ashamed of and that I'm embarrassed about. And I remember when I sent the manuscript to my editor at the publisher, I looked at my wife and I said, I hope I'm making the right decision. Like this could be the worst decision I've ever made. But I knew intuitively that the value of the book would be directly correlated to the extent to which I was willing to be vulnerable, because why do it otherwise? You know, and I think, my book, Finding Ultra, it's an addiction recovery memoir. It's also like this sports story, and it's also kind of like a health and wellness primer. But ultimately, it could be categorized as a sports memoir. And like, I hate sports memoirs because they're usually written by athletes in the twilight of their career, and they're intended to kind of create a halo effect and perhaps buy them a couple years in the spotlight. And that's why they're not good, because they're inherently less than honest. And I've never won a race. It's not like I went to the Olympics or anything like that. Like, why should anyone care what I have to say about this? The only way that this is going to be compelling is if I, take my specific experiences and try to connect with something more universal about the human condition. And that can only come through, a profound level of honesty.
Yeah, and that happened. You created something very unique, which was this sort of combination of kind of a sobriety memoir, health and wellness, athletic memoir, plus a reinvention memoir. So you were in your 40s, a time when people think, well, my knees are starting to hurt, maybe I shouldn't run marathons anymore. There's a lot of people are thinking like of slowing down, and you were literally speeding up at that point. Mm-hmm. And I think you gave permission for people who were reading it to say, oh yeah, he stopped being a lawyer to do this. He stopped, he became sober, and then this started happening. He went vegan, this started happening. He's in his 40s and he's doing all these athletic competitions. It's sort of like you gave permission not only for other people to be equally vulnerable, and I'm sure you got lots of messages like, man, I was in the same situation as you, and so on. But you also gave people permission to, hey, if he could do it, I could run a marathon or do something incredible when I'm 45 that I never thought I could do before. And I think that's something, like, I'm curious now, like when you're thinking that was a very pivotal story for you, right? And it's an iconic story. Like you were saying essentially, I was down and out, then this happened, and then I became a superhero. So it's like this iconic story. Do you ever feel like tied to that story? Like you have to keep repeating it or find a new story? Do you ever grapple with the hold that story now has over you versus what the hold you originally had on that story?
Yeah, 100%. And I've worked really hard to kind of transcend that a little bit. Certainly, I think when the book came out, it was sort of characterized as a book about running, which it isn't. It's not about becoming an ultra marathoner. It's very much a choose yourself story.
Absolutely.
It's about the inherent power that we all have within ourselves to, basically shift the trajectory of our life, even if we find ourselves in our 40s or in our later years, that inherent capacity lives within all of us to tap into, a deeper reservoir of human potential in whatever way, feels right to you. And I think it took a long time for that message to kind of percolate out of what was considered to be a running book. But then, yeah, I wouldn't say trapped. I think that's too strong of a word, but this sense of being like, oh, you're the vegan ultra athlete. Like, yeah, that's something that I did, but it's only one aspect of who I am. And the podcast very much it's not about me. It's about my guests. It's about the next chapter. If the book was going to have, an epilogue, like, okay, now what? Like I leveraged some tools to grow and manifested this thing that I talk about in this book, but that growth continues. That's not the end of the story. I want to continue to grow. If I could make these changes, what other areas in my life am I currently blind to? So let's go on a journey to explore that with the smartest, most interesting people that I can find. And that has nothing to do with my story and everything about, the wisdom that's available in the world.
And so now you've interviewed hundreds of really amazing guests. A lot of them kind of athletic, but not all of them. A lot of it's about wellness, but again, not all of it. It's all people who have captivated you or interested you for various reasons. And let me ask you this. So I'm debating this. So I've also interviewed hundreds and hundreds of my heroes and, authors who are, passing through the city. So I get to interview them and so on. And I've interviewed many, people I've just always looked up to. And I'm starting to wonder, okay, after 500 of those, maybe sometimes I want to just say what I think about things rather than just always interview people. Right. And so I'm kind of going forth on that of mixing that up a little, not completely, but just mixing it up. So it's not, there's 2 million interview podcasts out there now. And we were just talking about this earlier. When we were in 2014, there was like 100 interview podcasts. And now there's literally 2 million. I'm not even exaggerating it. And we've also interviewed everybody. And so now we haven't interviewed the whole planet, but we've interviewed a lot of people. So people start repeating things or saying similar things. But I'm sure your audience, they're listening to you for a reason, and maybe they want to start hearing more of what you have to say about a topic. And I wonder if you've ever debated doing kind of more solo stuff.
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts. First of all, both of us have been doing this for a while. I started mine in late 2012. You've done more episodes than me, but I started a little bit ahead of you.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of overlap in our guests. We've been on similar journeys. Indeed, when we started, it was not a competitive environment. Both our shows went right to the top and kind of stayed there. And in the intervening years, this medium has been adopted in a very mainstream way. So the ecosystem has matured tremendously around us. We were both lucky enough to grab a little piece of real estate and hold on to it. But I certainly wouldn't want to be somebody starting an interview-based podcast now. I think it would be very, very difficult to do that. So I'm extremely grateful to be in the position that I'm in, and I'm sure you feel the same way. But here we are, and I'm interested in your thoughts too. I'm going to throw this back to you. Like, what is the state of union with this medium? And as somebody who thinks about things in a counterintuitive way and with a different lens, like, what is the future of this? And, I'll continue to answer your question and allow you to answer that when I'm done. I think that, I had Kamal Ravikant over here yesterday, your good friend, and we were talking about your show. And I said to Kamal, I go, I tune into James. Like, James has lots of interesting people on his show, but I want to hear James. Like, I'm fascinated by your lens, your perspective on the world, and you're the reason that I tune in. So I think that is a smart and appropriate pivot for you to start to have more standalone episodes with just your reflections and your thoughts. In my own case, I have thought about that. The hardest part of this whole podcast thing for me is doing the introductions. Like, when I'm alone talking into a microphone, I'm so up in my head and it feels so unnatural. So the idea that I would sit down and just deliver a monologue, spontaneously from whole cloth, even if I had an outline, that scares me. And I feel like that is a skill that I haven't yet honed. And perhaps that's a reason to attempt it.
Or there's a way to experiment in the sense that, let's say you have just someone sitting here who's listening, and occasionally, maybe instead of like in an interview, it's, let's say, 50-50. But let's say in this case,
you need a foil.
Yeah, a foil. Yeah. You need someone who you're just going to throw things against, and if something doesn't quite stick, they'll inform you of it.
Yeah, like a more than like a co-host, but somebody who can like match your wits and push you to deliver a monologue here or there.
Like, let's say there's...
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, let's say there's an issue that, triggered that emotional impulse for you this week. So something happened that bothered you, and you just wanted to, and you wanted to talk about it, but not necessarily the issue, but even more globally. Like, what does this mean for either the world or people, or what did I learn from this, or the economy, or whatever? And you just start ranting on it.
Yeah.
And
I do have a little bit of an insecurity around it, I think. Here's an example. So last year we did our first like live podcast event. We booked this big theater and we sold it out. It was like 1,200 seats.
That's great.
And the idea was to do a live podcast but also produce a show that was very, that kind of transcended this podcast format to create an entertaining experience for people. I had my sons play music, and then in cue perform some live poetry. And then I did a live podcast with Paul Hawken, who's like this legendary environmentalist. And I conducted that podcast very much as if he was sitting across from me right now. Like I kind of maintained that format. And after the show was over, I basically went, out into the hallway and just talked to people for as long as they wanted to talk to me. And I was there for hours and hours and hours. And I realized in retrospect, oh, these people, like, I think they're coming to see Paul Hawken, And I realized like, oh, they are coming to see me, which makes me uncomfortable. Like it doesn't feel like because I have profound imposter syndrome. Like I can't imagine why anyone would want to come and see me. But so the growth for me is in owning that and living up to that on some level that I have had certain life experiences that have value, and that there is something interesting about sharing, my perspective.
Yeah. Or what if you even went on Twitter beforehand and you said, listen, I'm going to try this solo episode thing, but give me some fuel. Ask me a bunch of questions. And then you pick the 4 or 5 that you like the best. And you could even just do a 20-minute episode or attach a story from your life to each question along with the answer or your answer. And that's an episode.
Right. Yeah, I think I'll probably try that. I think I wouldn't say I'm in a rut, but we have like a routine now, and I know how it goes and it's working. And you're somebody who's coming in as, like this disruptive force who's like always, got the waiter pads, and you're writing down the 10 ideas every day, and you're like trying to buy Greenland, and you're doing all this crazy stuff. And what I love and appreciate about it isn't just the kind of courage to do it. It's your relationship with the outcome, I feel, is very healthy. Like it's not about whether it works or not. You're just doing it.
Right, because here's what I always think is that something's going to work. Some outcome will exist that I like, but it doesn't have to be the outcome of whatever it is I'm doing that day. So I'm doing something, let's say today or tomorrow or the next day, I'm doing something to try something new or try an experiment or write something. Eventually, the outcome might be bad. Like, for instance, this Greenland Kickstarter thing, and again, this is a silly example, but that was essentially a failure. I didn't raise $100 million to buy Greenland. Kickstarter shut me down, and it was fast enough. It didn't really get as widely spread as a successful outcome would have been. But it was interesting. I learned something. I learned a whole bunch of things, and then you move on. Because
you have this amazing story.
Yeah, I have an amazing story, and now I have knowledge. Okay, here's how to do a Kickstarter if I want to try something new. And so now I can do the next thing, which might be just as crazy or not, and the outcome may be good, maybe bad. Eventually, there'll be some outcomes will be better than others, but whether the outcome is bad or good, I'm learning from each thing.
Right. You've canonized this as the 10,000 experiments rule. We all talk about the 10,000 hour rule. You're like, that's nonsense. Let's focus on 10,000 experiments instead. Yeah,
because so the 10,000 hour rule, which was developed by a great guy, Professor Anders Ericsson, he basically determined if you devote yourself to 10,000 hours of what he calls deliberate practice at any field, you'll be among the best in the world at that field. And this was written about by Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers, and it kind of became a popular phrase after that. I just couldn't wrap my head around it, though, because I feel like I've gotten good at a bunch of different things, and I don't think I spent 10,000 hours at them. And for some things, I couldn't figure out what does he mean by 10,000 hours. Like, I understand with, let's say you're, doing a golf putt. I can understand practicing that for 10,000 hours and you'll get better at golf putting. But for something like writing, what does it mean to spend 10,000 hours writing? Like there's so many nuances in a creative field, and it's not like repetitive. It's not like I can get after I write a sentence, I can get a coach to say, well, that sentence could have been better. So I didn't really, and I would write to him, and he's always very smart, and he was always very friendly to respond. And I read all these different theories, like, can I borrow hours from this other activity? So I was trying to get good at stand-up comedy. I started this It's a random thing. Got passionate about it about 5 years ago. Started going up on stage, and I was trying to figure out, can I borrow from my 10,000 hours public speaking and some hours from my writing and some hours from just, I don't know, being funny, or how does it work? And so
the transferability of these skills in a variety of disciplines, can you aggregate them to come up with your 10,000 hours?
Yeah, or at least give me some head start. And he kept writing about, well, what's the metric you're judging yourself with? And there's really no metric. Like, how do you determine if something, for instance, is good writing or not? Is it book sales? No. Is it if your favorite professor likes it? No. It's hard for creative efforts. It's hard to have a metric of success for sales ability, for business ability. There's so many like other factors like luck, environment, the people you're dealing with. It's hard to measure your success with these 10,000 hours. And it was confusing talking to him. So then I figured, well, maybe there are, and then the other thing that concerned me was, well, what if you take training methods now and go back to the 1920s? So for instance, if someone took coaches who train for marathons and took those same techniques back to the 1920s when coaching techniques were not as advanced, would it be then 100 hours to be the best in the world? Right. You know, the hours change depending on how advanced the field is. So more things kept coming up that I didn't really understand, and that's when I started thinking of another model completely to measure my own success and then to accelerate my own learning in different fields. And so I was very excited about that because it basically took me 2 or 3 years to be a good, solid professional investor. It took me 2 years to achieve a level I wanted in, let's say, a game like chess, which is normally a hard skill, or computer programming, which is a hard skill. And then with stand-up comedy also, I was 48 years old at the time. I'm 52 now. I didn't want to go 10,000 hours or 20 years to get good at something. I don't want to be on stage when I'm 68 years old trying to make a bunch of strangers laugh. Like, it feels silly to me. I just wanted to get good at it now. I wanted to literally skip the line. Everybody kept telling me, don't think you can skip the line. Like, we've all worked hard.
Especially in stand-up comedy. Like, they're very, respect your elders, and that's very much, you got to grind and pay your dues. And
that's what people tell me.
Comedian will be like, you got to go up there and bomb 1,000 times, and just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And in 10 years, you'll be good.
Yeah, 10 best case is what they would say.
And here you are, like, you start basically telling jokes on the subway, right? And,
so
now you're headlining.
Right.
What is the time period?
It's basically about 5 years, but like 4 years since I started taking it super seriously, where I would go up 2 or 3 times a week, and more recently, up to 10 times a week. So, but yeah, I had to really be very analytical about it, and I would deconstruct every comedian's act so I would understand what they were doing, and then I would explain it back to them, and they were like, I never thought of it like that, which is fine. Like, they have their process. But then I started constructing experiments I can do to basically accelerate my learning, and I found every experiment really changed the way I would do comedy. So I would start people would see me from 1 month to the next, and they're like, boy, when did you start doing X, Y, or Z? And I'm like, after this experiment I did where I saw these other things weren't working. And sometimes the experiments are very simple. Like, between jokes, what if you just lean back against the wall and look up at the ceiling for 3 seconds or for half a second? Like, so just even an experiment like that, because there's this feeling on stage that you have to spit everything out as quickly as possible. Or, you mentioned one experiment I did. I went on I wanted to tighten up my one-liner. So I went on the subway and did stand-up comedy on a crowded subway cars where nobody wants to hear you tell jokes. Nobody likes you. Nobody is in the best case. The
bar towards getting a laugh is very high.
Right. They're not. They didn't just pay a cover charge to see a comedian. They just want to get home. Like, you're bothering them at that point, and they're not drinking, so they want to drink.
Some of them might be.
Right. Some of them might be, and most of them want to drink. And then this person just gets on the car and starts telling jokes straight at them, and it's very difficult. But
did you get some laughs though?
I did. Yeah. Oddly, I would get on and I would say, like, the one thing that got the most laughs is like, was this the 6.5 stop? Like, is this the train to Hogwarts? And so kids would laugh at that. And then I did another one. Hey, I ordered an Uber pool, but they sent me the subway car. So that got some laughs. Those are like the main two things that got laughs.
You have to be so comfortable with your vulnerability, though.
But I wasn't.
It's like,
I was with a friend of mine, and this person brought on a video camera just so I could study it later. And I got on and I looked around and I'm like, forget it. We just wasted our time. Like, you could just put the camera away. And I was like, and then I said, on second thought, just turn it on and let's just wait a second. So my friend turned on the video camera and then I just went off. So it just, I just went without thinking. And you know, sometimes people will laugh and sometimes people were like, you know, boo, like, get out of here. So, but that happens.
You got to be okay with either one, right?
Yeah, you got to be okay with either one.
I mean, that's the difference between true vulnerability and what I see a lot of now, which is, I call it performative vulnerability. It's sort of like, now it's cool to be vulnerable all of a sudden. And you see a lot of people using it in a very, I feel like, disingenuous way. Like, oh, like when you're vulnerable online, that's how you get people interested in what you're doing. So I'm going to do this. And it's like this weird, like, fake vulnerability.
Yeah, and I see that it's almost like you can't. If you pick up a recent self-help book or almost any recent self-help book, and I'm not going to throw the whole industry under the bus, but a lot of recent self-help books, you can't even. The author always starts off like, well, I was in my darkest moment, and then XYZ happened, and I started writing in my gratitude journal and whatever, and then everything became better. And it's like, that's like a bad, and then even in Silicon Valley, it's like a badge of honor. Like, yeah, I failed at my first startup and blah, blah, blah. And then now I'm ready. And yeah, I agree. I think it's a way to kind of it's almost too transactional, the vulnerability.
Right. Yeah. Transactional, I think, is a good word. And hand in hand with that, I'm sure you do too, like, I get all the galleys in the mail now.
Yeah.
When you host a podcast, like, suddenly books just arrive at your house all the time. Like, I get like 6 books a week in the mail. And generally they'll be, you know, the upcoming self-help books, right? So I have so many self-help books being delivered on the regular here that it's made me very cynical about all of it. You know, I just look at this and I'm like, they all, and I can't possibly read all of them, but maybe you can. But I just kind of page through them and I'm like, they just feel like different flavors of the same thing. And it's made me like less interested in all of that.
Yeah, that's why I think, well, look at, you know, for instance, Finding Ultra, or in my upcoming, you know, Skip the Line, I think about this. Forget about all self-help. What are my real stories, for better or for worse, and what did I learn from them, and what can I extrapolate? The extrapolation is what gives it the self-help categorization. Like, okay, I did this, this, and this, so that's a formula. But I always say I'm not giving advice. This is what worked for me specifically, but maybe it's broad enough it could work for others. And I always want to make sure it's just not like not only is there a self-help genre, but they all kind of recommend the same thing. And you get this sense they're recommending it without real experience, or they're recommending it so they can start getting speaking gigs talking about it, because you can make a lot of money talking, motivating companies. And so I always try to make sure I'm saying something really unique, like this 10,000, thinking about learning and the 10,000 hour rule and how I could succeed. Like, you went through this in your mid 40s, you left a profession and kind of started you did start new professions. And that a lot of people are going through that, but they always think, well, I'm already 45. How am I going to learn to be the best or the top 1% of some field so I can make a living at this? Because you need to be in the top 1% roughly to make a living and to feed your family. And we're going through it just personally and as an economy. And so really grappling with that and how I challenged myself to learn different things and how I failed at many things along the way, I had to think, well, what's happening? And that's where I went from the 10,000 hour rule to can I borrow hours, or is there like shortcuts or cheat sheets, or what's actually happening? And you have to really think inside, what happened to me that I can bring out as a story? And I feel like you did that too with Finding Ultra. Was your unique path to saying, hey, at 45, you could still be a top, world-class athlete and do these things and get over these issues and change careers and on and on and on.
Yeah, but I think my book was really just a story, whereas you look at these things that have happened in your life and you look at other successful people and you're trying to extrapolate the themes and the lessons and then figure out a way to communicate a path forward through a lens or a path that perhaps has never really been fully articulated. Like the Skip the Line book that you have coming up. Like I haven't read it yet, but you've told me a little bit about it. And I think it's interesting because it's about this very thing of like, look, we're in a rapidly changing world where we're going to be compelled to have to reinvent ourselves. We're living longer, et cetera. And you don't want to just have to switch gears and figure out a new career later in life and start at the bottom. You're somebody who has had success in a variety of disciplines without really having to do that, without putting in 10,000 hours, and somehow found your way into that like top tier, that top 1% of these disciplines. So what was it? What was the differentiator here, and what can be learned from that experience that could be helpful to other people?
Yeah, and I think, and look, there's other things too that I've massively failed at. So you sort of learn along the way, I better restrict my failure so I don't lose everything on this failure. So you have to also construct ways to get better at something where you're not risking your entire life. And like you even said earlier, you the transition from lawyer to everything else you're doing now, it took a while. Like people kind of think, oh, well, I'm going to quit being a lawyer and start being a podcaster and the money's just going to roll in. It doesn't really work like that for anybody in the world.
Yeah.
It's a process, and it's a process of trying lots of different things. It's a process of transition. It's a process of finding more and more things that you enjoy and that you love doing and that your passions maybe lie, and maybe when you find something you're passionate about, you're able to double down on it enough so that, again, you're not risking too much, but you double down and you see how it works and how it feels, and it's a process.
Yeah. So you've got this book about billionaires. Think like a billionaire.
Yeah.
I feel like culturally we're in a moment where we're fetishizing these people,
and on both sides.
Yeah. Both sides meaning what?
Like some people, you'll see politically, people will say, well, banish all billionaires, or somebody in politics said, and this is not, I'm very apolitical, but someone in politics said, billionaires have not earned the money, they took the money. So there's a very kind of almost violent, revolutionary backlash against these people who have accumulated this one particular number or more. And on the flip side, you can say, well, these are people perhaps who have accumulated certain habits that maybe you'd want to emulate if you wanted success, even if it wasn't success about money. And then you can also say, okay, well, are there benefits to this class of people who have accumulated so much wealth? Are they giving to charity? Are they solving world problems? Are they creating impact more than if the money was being used in other ways? And I shouldn't even say being used, because often money is created. That's something that a lot of people don't understand about the economy. There could be more money next year than there is this year, because people who are innovative use their innovations to create money seemingly out of thin air. But if Elon Musk sells more Teslas and he raises money by having an IPO and his Tesla goes public and whatever, money is basically created and to some extent put into his pocket. So it's not like they've created it out of their innovations. But sometimes they're bad guys and sometimes they're good guys, like anyone else.
I mean, there is a sense, I think, that you don't get to that level of wealth and accumulation without stepping on a lot of people and having to do some dastardly things.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the sense. And it's easy to have that sense, because let's say there's a few thousand billionaires and there's 300 million other people in the US. So we're all allowed to trash this. They're certainly not a minority, just because even though there's just a few thousand of them, they're people who are very privileged and benefit and they have every advantage in society. And by the way, some of them are really bad people, but some of them are enormously charitable. Like you look at efforts like Bill Gates, and again, I don't know whether you like Microsoft Windows or not, but you look at Bill Gates, he has spent hundreds of millions or billions to try to eradicate malaria in Africa. And yeah, you ask yourself, well, if the money had gone to a government instead of Bill Gates, would that government have been able to solve malaria as well? I don't know. I'm not an expert, but it seems like Gates has made a dent on it and nobody else historically has made a dent on it. And I heard one interesting story where Bill Gates gave like $100 million to a government, just like the U.S. might give $100 million to the government. Here's aid, solve malaria. And then that particular government was corrupt. The leaders left and the money was just gone, not spent, disappeared, probably into some Swiss account. The leaders moved away and whatever. So the next leader got in and Bill Gates said, okay, I'm going to give you $100 million again, but now I'm going to have more control over it and see how you spend it and see where it's put. And he made a dent in eradicating malaria in this particular country. So you have to look at instances too and see what's happening. What are these people doing with the money?
Right. But isn't Bill Gates more of an outlier in that regard? Like there's a lot of guys with, lots of yachts and things like that.
I would say he is an outlier. But there's also, there's thousands of billionaires. So let's even say there's a few hundred outliers who are trying to do charitable things. And by the way, I'm not trying to, really the purpose of that book was to say, okay, I've been so bad and such a failure at dealing with money. Maybe I could learn what did they do that I don't do I could learn from. So it really had nothing to do with whether they were good or bad. And so I always feel like I'm apologizing a little.
It's also not about making money. It's about habits and a perspective on life and how they kind of live their day on the daily that lead them in that direction. Right.
Like not a single thing in that book is about, well, this is the kind of investing they did. And this is the kind of companies they would start. And here's how they would boss people around. But just on the Bill Gates thing, yes, he's probably an outlier. But you do see lots of examples of charitable things, or even let's say not charitable, like, Ken Langone, multi-billionaire, started Home Depot. He saw a problem, which is that many people didn't have access to the full range of home improvement tools that they would probably want. And he created Home Depot. It became big, and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs were created. Just maybe millions of jobs over the 30 years Home Depot's been around. And, over 100,000 people got very wealthy by being employees of Home Depot. So he created real wealth in society. He solved lots of problems. Now, Ken Langone, almost every hospital in New York is named after him because he gives so much to charity. And I don't really know him, so I can't say good or bad. But again, I asked myself, well, okay, it seems like both from the capitalist side, he created lots of jobs and he solved a big problem. He was also charitable. Then I asked, what habits did he have that maybe are worth emulating? And if somebody else has a different opinion of him, that's fine. But then I can say, well, I like these habits and I'll emulate them. Having a strong family, for instance, or having a strong ability to execute on ideas, which is something I didn't always have.
Right. I mean, you kind of break it down. You've got like obsession and, overcoming resistance, persuasion, empathy, problem solving, and this idea of skill versus habit, which I thought was super interesting.
Yeah. Like it's not like a lot of these people have real skills as opposed to just, they're waking up at 6 a.m. every day or they're, going to the gym every day. These are all good habits and healthy habits to have. But how did Richard Branson persuade someone at Boeing to lend this 27-year-old nobody an entire plane, like $150 million plane? I can't call up Boeing and just ask for a plane. Like they'll hang up on me.
What do you mean you tried to buy Greenland? Why not?
Oh, well, yeah, it's true. But
his ace in the hole was that there was an anti-competitive climate at the time.
Well, was that his ace in the hole, or did he find that in the hole? Like he was the one who brought that up to them. Like they basically would said no, and he's like, well, listen, how else are you going to compete and get competitive pricing with British Airways? So he put this in their heads and convince them. Right. And so it's interesting to see the little nuances of how these people achieve things, because it is nuanced. Each skill they had, their skills at persuasion or sales or execution or having creative ideas, or even the way they would do things. Like, so, Damon John's an interesting example. He was a waiter at Red Lobster, and on the weekends he would sew these hats on his corner, and they had like hip hop logos on it. And then suddenly Macy's makes this $100,000 order, and he can't make $100,000 worth of hats. He works full time as a waiter at Red Lobster. So what did he do? He said, "Of course I will give you 100. Give me a week. I'll get you $100,000 worth of these hats." He had no reason to say yes, and then he goes to his mom and he's like, "Mom, I need to mortgage your house." And so he mortgages his mom's house, gets the money out, hires a bunch of seamstresses, and they work 24 hours a day in his mom's now mortgaged house. And then a few days later, he delivers the goods to Macy's. They give him the $100,000 check. He pays off the bank, gets the mortgage back, and now he has FUBU, which goes on for $6 billion in sales.
So what is the skill in that?
That skill is what I call ready, fire, aim. So this kind of instinct to get all ready. Like he knew he sold hats, $100,000 worth of hats to Macy's. He hadn't yet aimed. He had no idea how he was going to do it, but he fired. He said, "Yes, I'll do it." And why is that a skill? Because he knew there would be some way he can connect the dots. And he probably already had thought it out, but he knew no matter what, there would be some way he could connect the dots. And a lot of people would say, "Oh, I can't sell you $100,000 worth. Yeah, but maybe I could sell you $1,000. We could do a test or whatever." He just went right for it. And so Sarah Blakely, who she's the founder of Spanx, she had a similar thing.
Jesse Itzler's wife.
Jesse Itzler's wife. Jesse, I'm sure, has been on this podcast. He's been on mine a bunch of times. And she was selling fax machines door to door. She had this idea for Spanx. She goes to sell them. She only has her one example Spanx. The woman tried it on and said, "Yeah, I'll buy $300,000 worth of it." And Sarah Blakely's like, "Done. I'll get it to you."
Right.
She had no manufacturer. She didn't know how to manufacture clothes at all. And it's not easy to convince some factory to manufacture all these clothes for you. Are you going to pay? Who are you? You're not a real company. And yet she found a manufacturer. She delivered the clothes, and then Spanx was in business. So that was, again, this ready, fire, aim ability.
But ready, fire, aim has to be underpinned by a profound sense of belief in oneself, right?
Believe in oneself.
You're not gonna move forward on ready, fire, aim unless you like have some level of deep conviction about what you're doing.
Yeah, and Sarah Blakely and Damon John in this case had enough experience with, let's say, clothing and clothing design to roughly know how they were going to connect the dots. Maybe they fully know, but more likely they roughly knew how they could do this, how they could scale what they were already doing to something 100 or 1,000 times more. And so you needed this confidence, but you needed knowledge too. So another example is Byron Allen. He recently, a few years ago, he bought the Weather Channel for $300 million. So he started out, he was a stand-up comedian, actually. He was the youngest guy ever on the Johnny Carson show. And then he had all sorts of weird experiences in comedy. And he said, "You know what? I don't want to be in front of the camera. I want to be behind it. I want to be the business guy. That's where the power seems to be." So he started pitching these shows, late night shows, to television networks. And they're like, "No, this sounds kind of weak." And he said, "Don't worry about it. You don't have to buy the show. Let's just do a 50-50 split on the ads." And then he found the advertisers, and it cost the stations nothing. If he didn't come up with the money, they would never have aired a show. But he kept finding the advertisers, and it's like 25 years later, these shows are still running, and he's accumulated so much money from them that he bought the Weather Channel for $300 million. He's bought other networks.
It's such a crazy story, because if you don't know that story, he's just the weird guy at 3 a.m. Because that show is still on, I think. You turn it on, like his interview show, and you're like, that guy's still doing that? And it's kind of like,
it's not really a quality show.
It's not a good show. And you're like, this show's been on for like 20 years. Like, how is this possible? Well, it's because he owns everything.
Yeah. And he sold all the ads. And, at that time, a lot of networks, and still do, they just have infomercials for a half hour. So they basically say to him, if we're running the infomercial, unless you show up with like 1 penny more, we're running the infomercial. So he just went out there, got the advertisers, and got syndicated all over the United States, created, ES Networks, I think is the name of his company.
And yeah, he was like a fair to middling stand-up comic who was part of that whole like Comedy Store, ecosystem. And I'm sure everybody told him he was insane for why nobody would even think to do that.
Yeah, and it's scary too. In all these instances, there's a little bit of a fear factor, like, oh gosh, what if I don't raise the money? But he limits his risk. It's like he doesn't have to put together the show either, really. First off, you see those shows, they're really cheaply done. It's just, they're like a podcast on TV.
I know.
But he went out and sold the advertising. And again, ready, fire, aim, but there's also skills in sales, creativity, persuasion, and knowing what doors to knock on. And if that didn't work, I'm sure he would have found some other thing. We think that's like their one idea, and if they didn't do that, they would have been a failure. No, my guess is all three of these people, Damon John, Sarah Blakely, Byron Allen, they probably would have succeeded at some other idea if that one hadn't worked.
Right. Well, on this theme of experimentation, you decide to publish this book on Scribd.
Yeah. So
that's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
I've published mainstream quite a bit, and then I've self-published quite a bit. So Choose Yourself was self-published, and actually is my best-selling book. And then I self-published.
That's the smartest thing you ever did.
Yeah, that was basically. I'm so glad I self-published that one, and I did what I called professionally self-published Choose Yourself. Like I hired a real cover designer, I hired real editors, I hired a real marketing company, and I really did it as if I was a publishing company, even better than what I thought a publishing company would do, and it worked really well. But for this one, I felt like, I've already done one route, I've done another route, I want to experiment a little bit, and Scribd is like this Netflix for books. You sign up and whatever, there's you can read every book that's been published ever or close to it. And they just started doing kind of like what Netflix did with shows. They started creating their own original books, Scribd originals. And so they approached me. I was telling the CEO about this book, and he said, well, how about we publish it as a Scribd original? And I said, okay. And so it's an experiment, and it's kind of 6 months exclusive there. And it's great. So I really enjoyed the experience. I've done, part of the experiment was, what are the benefits? Well, they have a million plus subscribers that get their emails. Oh, so my name will be on an email to 1 million people. So just more, this is not the last book I'm ever doing, or it's not the first book, but it's nice to have exposure to an additional million-size audience and to build a relationship with this Netflix of books, depending on, they seem to be continue growing. And so yeah, it's just another experiment. And
are you happy with how it's working out there? Like, is there a sense that this was the right move versus just putting it up on Amazon as a self-published work?
Yeah, because on Amazon, again, I'm like every other book out there, and it's not like I'm against Amazon. I love publishing there, and I love self-publishing there. But here's a case where I'm one of the only books in this category of Scribd originals in a website that, maybe up to 2 million people go to all the time. So I figured, let's see if this is a real advantage. And you always want to go to the room least crowded. So when we started doing podcasting, particularly when you started doing it, this was the room least crowded in media. Yeah. Now it's very crowded, but like you said earlier, it's a good thing we got here when it wasn't crowded, so we could carve out our space. And here I'm on Scribd, that's in publishing. I don't know, something like 5 million books a year published now on Amazon, a lot of them self-published. Okay, here's a place where there's only 4 books published in this way.
Right.
They all the mainstream published books are on Scribd.
The upside opportunity is much higher.
Yeah.
For having something break out in a meaningful way.
And if the book failed completely, okay, it'll be like 18 of my other 22 books that failed completely. Right. So there's no big deal.
One of the things that I think we share in common is an aversion to setting long-term goals. Like, I don't know about you, but people ask me all the time, like, what's your vision? Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or what's your life like in 10 years? And I honestly, I always feel guilty or perhaps even ashamed because I don't even think about that. Like, right. I can't, half the time I find myself like making something up to answer the question. And I've realized more recently, like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, I have no idea. And I don't really expend mental energy in that way. That's funny. I didn't know that about you because I do think a lot of people talk in terms of, well, I want to be here in 3 years and then 6 years and then 10 years. And then, well, in order to be here in 10 years, I've got to do this today and like next month and whatever. And I think it makes no sense to have goals. It sort of implies that my knowledge now is so much greater than it might even be in 10 years from now, that my 10-year from now version of myself better listen to me now because I'm smarter now in terms of where I should be in 10 years. I don't know if this is all adding up, all the numbers. But basically, you're learning more every day. So tomorrow or next month, I might know something about myself and my interests and my passions or about the world that changes where I want to be in a month or 2 months or in a year. So I don't understand like how people could even figure out
how will they even know what they want to be in 1 year or 5 years?
Well, I think that goals have their place. Like if you say, like, this is something I want to manifest in the next year, then there are certain steps you're going to have to undertake to realize that. Like if I want to do a crazy race, for example, or complete a book, like you can set up benchmarks to lead you in that direction. And I think that's completely appropriate. But I think forecasting a vision for your life, I guess it works for some people. For me, it doesn't. Like everything that has been successful in my life has been, I wouldn't call it happenstance, but it didn't result from me, putting it on a vision board.
Yeah, I think that's a good difference between goals and what was the word you just used?
Stepping stones.
No.
Benchmarks.
No, but like that.
Aspirations.
There's a difference between having something that you're moving towards today. So like, let's say you want to get a faster running time for a marathon. Okay, you could adjust things a little bit in how you're running. And today you're going to try this and see if your running is faster. Mm-hmm. But what if 2 months from now, and all of this could be because a year from now, you want to enter in this marathon and do it faster than a certain time. But what if 2 months from now, I don't know, Disney calls you up and says, Rich Roll, we want you to play Iron Man's father in the next Iron Man movie. And you're like, well, I was going to do this marathon and that's my goal. So like, call me back in a year. You wouldn't do that. You would just change. Now that's an extreme example, but yeah. So today you could say, well, I really want to benchmark myself against how I'm doing a race and I'm going to improve. Otherwise you would there's no reason to do anything. But things change and the things you love doing change. What if suddenly you decide, oh man, I really love writing cookbooks, and you decide 2 months into the year, I really just want to spend this year, all my creativity writing cookbooks, and your goals change. So the year I started more passionately doing stand-up comedy, my goal, so to speak, for the year was I was going to write a novel. That was where I was going to put my creativity. But then I just started going up more than once a week on a stage, and then I got heckled once, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just next week, I'm going to come back 3 times and I'm going to figure out why I was heckled, and I'm going to talk to people and think about this. And it just never stopped. I never got back to writing that novel. Things change.
But ultimately, the fidelity is to your curiosity, right? And
yes.
I think when you double down on your curiosity and you have the willingness and the tenacity to follow that, like to continue to pull on that thread, it creates a compounding interest that in a real world context shows up in opportunities that you couldn't have predicted or imagined.
Yeah, like let's say, for instance, Greenland suddenly
James, now we're interested.
Yeah, suddenly, or let's say suddenly somebody says, this is a great idea. How about we write a movie about somebody who buys Greenland and what happens?
Right.
And okay,
what if it actually worked?
Yeah, well, I would say yes to any of the possibilities instead of going back to a stand-up stage. It just because you sort of fall in love with different things and you experiment enough with enough things that you figure out, oh, yeah, this is pulling me a little bit more, so I'm going to double down on it. And then everyone will say, well, what? Wait a second, you were just doubling down on this other thing. No. Now I really feel more passionate about this. So again, as long as you don't say, no, I'm not going to take care of my kids anymore. I'm going to backpack around the world. There's certain responsibilities that you have to do. But again, with given our creativity is very free. We could spend it in most cases how we want, and you should try lots of things and see where your heart is kind of compelling you to go further. Mm. Even whether you're failing or succeeding at that point doesn't matter. It's like where I want to get better at this. This is fun when I'm doing it, and it's not fun when I'm doing other things.
Right. In thinking about this podcasting space, I think how many podcasts are there now?
I think 2 million.
2 million.
Yeah.
2 million podcasts. Like how many hours of people talking spontaneously about whatever's going on in their mind? And I thought the other day, what if podcasting existed in 1780? What would podcasting look like in if we could go back and just listen to people talking about the times in that time, what an incredible historical record that would be, that would shape and change how we think about history and how we consume history and how we synthesize world events. And now we're creating that now. Like 100 years from now, this will all still be, available to people to look back on and try to, better understand, this moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, imagine back in the 1780s, like just Benjamin Franklin and John Adams would be having like,
right. What if Marcus Aurelius, instead of like, writing his meditations, was doing a podcast about it?
Yeah, a podcast about Stoicism. Like, Seneca, can you please come on my podcast? I'll promote your notes of Seneca. We'll talk about it everywhere. And I wonder about now with 2 million, how do you separate out the good from the bad? And I don't like to call any of them bad, like everyone's trying. But it's like we were talking about earlier, I'm trying to just always understand formats and how much, how can I change the format just slightly even from my usual one. And you've been doing a lot of great stuff with YouTube and videos, like you've been combining kind of your podcast voice with kind of more conceptual video about what you're talking about.
Yeah, we just started doing that, and I want to do more of that. But that's an experiment.
Yeah, it's totally an experiment. How long will you do it? Maybe you do 10 of them, 5 of them, 50 of them, and people will say, well, no, you got to be consistent and focused. That could be true. Maybe you need to do 1,000 of them, and then it just suddenly you have millions of views per video, but you might get tired of doing them after 20, and you say, no, let's focus on TikTok instead. So, or whatever you focus on next. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of, I'm always, it's interesting now too, because another thing that's happened in the media world that's changed, which is that I think followers don't matter anymore. So people have, X number of Twitter followers, YouTube subscribers, Instagram followers, Facebook followers. I don't think that matters anymore, because I think algorithms have basically ruled over followers. So the algorithm will decide who sees your video or who sees your photo, not so much your followers. Because if you have, let's say you have 100,000 followers or even 10,000 followers, and let's say a lot of them have hundreds of followers, and they're on Instagram for 3 minutes, the algorithm's got to pick which one of their followers are going to be rewarded with their eyesight. So I think it's very hard in today's world to come up with good, appealing content that rises to the top. It's in a good way, it's much more equalitarian. Everyone's got an equal footing because followers don't matter as much. On the second hand, it's harder to curate, I think.
Well, it makes it rife for trying to manipulate. It becomes about manipulating the algorithm.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to substandard content in order to game the system. But I think it is true, like the follower count thing. I mean, there was a day, in 2009, if somebody with 1 million followers like retweeted your tweet, you would get
celebrate
like
that
in
day.
5 minutes you would get 30,000 new people following you. Like now, every once in a while, somebody of that stature will share something that I've done, and zero impact on anything. It's like that ship has sailed, and I don't have a huge Facebook following. I think it's like 130,000 or something like that. It's substantial, but I'll post the podcast on Facebook, and it'll get like 2 shares.
Yeah.
And like it'll show you how many people it sees it. And it'll be like 400 people. It's like, unless you pay to boost this stuff or create ad campaigns around it, they just choke it.
So I try that too. I pay ad campaigns sometimes around the podcast. Useless. Doesn't work. Like, and so I'll have 50,000 people view it magically. I don't know who these 50,000 people are.
But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, still 5 people clicked on it.
Right.
So it's not even, has nothing to do with the content. I don't know what it has to do with. And I'm pretty sure I'm structuring these ads right, but I don't know, all of that. It's always important to still have as high quality as possible, but other things are sort of rising to the top of importance, and they're harder to figure out. And I don't like the idea. It's even hard to game the algorithm, but I don't even like thinking in that way somehow.
I never think about it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, like, I think, people will say, oh, you should do this and you should, here's the strategy and here's how you should lay out your Instagram. And I just can't wrap my head around any of that. And I just believe to this day, even if it's hard, that ultimately, the highest quality content will rise to the surface and it will find its audience. And that means that you have to be in it for the long run, and you have to be patient, and you can't be upset if it's not getting the level of attention that somebody else who's specifically crafted content to create some level of virality is going to get.
Yeah, and so what's interesting there is you have a specific point of view also. So you're not just hoping that the quality is going to get a lot of people. You have a point of view that people, if they want your point of view, they have to listen to you. And so it could be you get, let's say, 100,000 super loyal people listening to your podcast. And you say to yourself, well, why does this other person have 1 million people? Well, they're just talking about, I don't know, the election every day, and then those people are going to disappear. They're not saying anything unique. It's just they're giving the latest news or whatever. And, so I think sometimes even measuring the number is the wrong metric, but we're used to it in this social media world. How many followers, how many subscribers, how many downloads? And you have to get back to like, well, if only 1,000 people like me, but they really love it. I mean,
I think that's more valuable.
Yeah.
Like I honestly, that my ego always wants something to be bigger and to be growing at a certain trajectory. But ultimately, what's meaningful about this work that you do and that I do is the capacity to impact people. And to the extent that you can improve the quality of the work to exacerbate that impact in a positive sense so that they're left with something substantial that really can move the needle in how they live their lives, that's the opportunity there. And so I try my best to like remain focused on that.
Yeah, and so let me ask you this. Has anyone ever walked up to you and said, "Oh my God, Rich Roll, your Instagram changed my life"? Like, has anyone ever said that to you?
No.
Right, but they'll come up to you.
Yeah.
I bet you they have come up to you and said, "Oh, Rich Roll, your podcast changed my life."
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, and
I'm
so
sure it happens to you.
Yeah, and again, no one's ever said to me, "Oh man, your Instagram, I love it. I check it out every day." Like, no one said that. And I have just as much followers there maybe as any place else. And you start to realize, okay, well, why am I pursuing that? Is it just for the numbers, or like really where I know where people are being impacted because they tell me. And so why am I trying to get TikTok followers or whatever? Like,
I know you joined TikTok, right?
Yeah, I joined TikTok. And by the way, that's a very creative medium. I'm not knocking
my daughters
TikTok.
They specifically prohibited me from joining TikTok.
Do they use it and they don't want you on it?
Yeah, they use it. They use it. My younger one more than my older one. But she was just more, because I was joking with her the other day. I was like, I'm going to join TikTok. I got to check this out. Half joking. Like, that's kind of where I draw the generational line. It's like,
but TikTok's really creative, actually. I love the scrolling the videos.
So I was kind of playing around with it, and my youngest daughter was just appalled. She's like, please don't.
Yeah, I mean, I was playing around with it, and then I didn't have any followers, and I put up one video. I put up a couple of videos, and one video got something like 200,000 views. And so I thought that was interesting. That okay, they're treating the algorithm differently than other places do.
Well, it's Twitter in 2007. Like, the opportunity to grow rapidly is available on that platform because it's a new platform.
Right. But then I looked at the video that did get me the 200,000 views, and I thought, man, that is the stupidest video I've ever done. And so it's just meaningless. Like,
right.
So I'd rather just do the podcast and not get.
Were you like dancing or something? What were you doing?
Well, that one people begged me to take down, and I did.
Yeah.
Like that, I decided, okay, this is beyond being afraid of what people will think of me. I'm making a fool of myself. So I took that one down.
Were you telling? You could test out your material though.
I could. I've seen people do that, and kind of comedians. It's interesting because I saw kind of what I would say were regular club comedians in New York City go on TikTok and suddenly get millions of views and 250,000 followers, and that actually was an indicator to me that this person was funny and appealing to a certain audience, and that was a data point for me when sort of seeing, because I own a comedy club too. So that was a data point for me in seeing, oh, should this person perform more here or not or whatever. But for me, I just put up some articles like an article I wrote in 2011. I took it and just basically set it in a TikTok kind of fashion, and it got 200,000 views. And another one that was against college got like 100,000 views or 80,000 views. So I thought, okay, it's interesting a little bit, but not enough. But it took a lot of time, even doing a 15-second video. So I figured, okay, this is not worth really doubling down on. It's an experiment, and
I appreciate the experimentation, and I also think it speaks to something that like Gary Vee talks about all the time, which is not being romantic about the platforms. Like, whatever's working, move in that direction. Like, you do lots of things, but fundamentally, I think of you as a writer, right? And this is, you really developed your audience through your blogging on your website. But then kind of blogging, really, it's not like a thing anymore, right?
No,
you pivoted to podcasting.
And that's the problem with writing is that.
But like writing should never go out of style. And yet nobody's a blogger anymore.
Yeah, no, there's no destination blogs. Like it used to be the case. There's no destination websites.
Trying to get people to go to your website is futile. You have to go where everyone already is.
Yeah, and so I think, then for a while, like places like LinkedIn and Medium worked, but I don't really see that as much now. So I don't know. Again, it's like when people come up to me and say, "Oh, I love X," it's usually the podcast, and then 1 out of 10 will be writing, and it's never anything else.
And what do you think? How do you think about iterating on that going forward? Like forecasting where podcasting is going, and perhaps being an early adopter of whatever the evolution of that is.
I think it's always hard to predict. Like if you look at what's happening now. So we were doing the interview format, and a lot of people do that. And look, the most popular podcast in the world, the Joe Rogan Show, is the interview format. So that's kind of staying. But
two people talking, I can't imagine is ever going to go out of style if it's a substantive, interesting, entertaining conversation.
Yeah, and then what's interesting is that storytelling is hitting the top 10 or the top 50 or the top 100. So like true crime stories. So it's like back to 1920s dime novels about crime. That's what's shooting up the fastest right now in podcasting. And then I would say also podcasts, and I look at Joe Rogan as an example, podcasts with a bunch of comedians talking is interesting. And again, Joe Rogan's got the most popular podcast in the world, and he is a stand-up comedian. Often he has his comedian friends on. That's who he's interviewing. And so I wonder if that's because it's a safe place to have extreme opinions but not be accused of being polarized in one way or the other. So like Joe and other people like that will say whatever they want. Like it's just insane what they'll say. And if they were like a big intellectual or whatever, people would say, you can't say that, it's this. You can't say that about climate change, it's this about climate change. You can't say this about the Republicans or the Democrats, it's the other way. But Joe, you can't ever figure out what he's talking about.
His genius is that, he's the first, he'll just say like, well, I'm a dummy comedian. Like you're why are you believing anything I have to say? Like, that's always his refrain.
Jon Stewart said the same thing throughout the entire, even though everybody admitted they got all of their news from The Daily Show, Jon Stewart would always say, oh, I'm not a news guy, I'm just a comedian. But he knew we all got our news from The Daily Show.
Right. Well, in the way that the porn industry drove technological innovation on the internet, comedians really are responsible for the birth of podcasting. Like they were the early adopters.
Oh, yeah.
They were the
Mark
canaries
Maron,
in the coal
Adam
mine.
Carolla.
Like those are the guys. Yeah, and like the early days of podcasting, it was almost entirely comedians. And you're correct in that now what's capturing people's attention, beginning with Serial, are these longer, highly produced stories. Our friend Neil Strauss did To Live and Die in LA, did tremendously well. And those are the ones that are kind of rising to the top. So does that leave you thinking like maybe I'll do something in that space? Like the amount of work that goes into crafting that. Like even if you took one interview and you like chopped it up and then you put voiceover review, contextualizing it, kind of like how the Gimlet shows do it. Like I've thought about that and I thought, that's just going to take up too much time. Like this is already taking up too much of my time.
I'm sorry about that, Rich.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you're going to 4 times a week with your show now.
But because 2 of those episodes, and maybe even 3, is just going to be me bothered by something and talking about it, perhaps with a foil, perhaps someone's in there to tell me I'm wrong, but it's not going to be the standard, okay, gosh, I've got to read 12 books, this week to prepare for the interview subjects, and
it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. So I kind of wanted to say, it's like what you were saying about somebody said, why were people listening to you? They weren't listening to see what you were asking the other person. They really wanted to hear you. And so I figured, okay, let me just try this. I'm going to say what I think is important to me this week and why, and how I'm being impacted, and kind of storytelling about me a little bit. Or a big need people have is, like, say when Iran happened. So January 3rd, we attack this guy, we kill this guy, and my kids were saying to me, are we getting drafted? Is World War III about to happen? So there was this real fear among everybody, and I see it even in my kids. And so I called up a big military expert, and I said, I don't know anything, and there's just a bunch of what I call spectators out there arguing all day long on Twitter and Facebook like they know something. Just let me ask you a bunch of questions, answer them, and now I'll know some more. And so that's what I did. And I think calming people down is a good role for podcasters with an audience. If you can get those guests and not have a traditional guest, but like, this is really scaring me right now. Let's break down what's happening. I think that's an easier format to prepare for because I know what I'm scared of. And I'm going to try doing that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I think that with that, then you have to embrace the idea of doing this contemporaneous with current events. Like I'm trying to do interviews that withstand the test of time and have an evergreen nature to them. And I've banked a bunch of interviews, and sometimes there's a long waiting period between they go, and then I feel bad about it because the person is wait, are you ever going to put that thing up that we did? And trying to find a way to be more facile with it. So from time to time, I can do a more current event oriented kind of show.
I've done, I think I'm at 543 right now. It's all been evergreen, but I'm trying every now and then to be a little current event, just because sometimes people are scared and there's no one, the media isn't properly addressing their fears because everybody's one side or the other side, and they're not just looking at facts. And also the media has incentive to kind of exaggerate certain facts or change certain facts. And I'm not blaming the media, it's everybody. And so sometimes I just want to know, should I be afraid or not afraid? So for instance, there's a lot of discussion lately about, well, is AI and technology going to wipe out 30 million jobs in the US, like all these people are saying? And so I've been in the computer science industry a long time ago, but I called up current experts in AI and automation just to see where things were at. And I found out and got less afraid and was able to communicate that. So that's not going to be evergreen, but it's good to answer this question for the next 6 months to a year that people have it.
Right.
And so sometimes now I'm just, again, playing to see maybe I need to be a little bit more current just to calm people down on really super important issues.
Of all these ideas that you've put out in the world, what idea stands out as the one that people went the most crazy about? Is it like you shouldn't go to college, or?
Okay, no, the most controversial. Well, the college one has gotten me death threats. So I
really death threats.
Death threats. So this is crazy. This guy wrote me he said all these things. I'm gonna kill you, and his IP address or whatever was on the email. Somehow or other, I was able to figure out his IP address. Turned out to be Brown University. So he was writing from Brown University, and he put his name. So I called up. So my whole thing is that I don't think kids in today's day and age, not necessarily 30 years ago or 40 years ago, but in today's day and age, kids shouldn't go to college because it's reinforcing the system of higher and higher tuitions. An entire generation of 30 million kids are going more and more in debt, which is going to create income inequality, and more bad things will happen. And you could learn these skills now from all these online sites, but there's a societal pressure. Anyway, that's my whole thing on college. And this guy wrote me a death threat. And so I called Brown University police. They put me in charge of the chief of police, and I should say allegedly Brown. I don't know if Brown will get upset at me. So and I read the email, and I said the name of the guy, and the chief of police says, yeah, that's pretty bad. And oh, by the way, yeah, we know that guy. He did a similar thing with the school librarian. And I'm like, well, shouldn't you do something about this? And he's like, come on, it's March. Do you really want? He's in his senior year. Just let him graduate. And I'm like, well, he's going to graduate maybe. And
yeah, that's the situation where 2 years from now he does something really bad and nobody did anything.
Right, but there was nothing I can do really. But the thing that's gotten people the most antagonistic of all was home ownership. So I would write, there's a lot of financial reasons why you shouldn't own a home. There's a lot of reasons why it's a really bad idea. And people got really upset about that. I did it on Yahoo Finance. It got over 10,000 comments. It got, millions of views and shares. And I've written it as an article, and I've done it as a podcast. Because that's the biggest financial decision you make in your life, there's all this.
It's also a source of tremendous pride for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you're basically challenging people's sense of themselves.
Yeah, and if you also spend that kind of money, your brain's not going to let you think the day afterwards.
You're too invested.
Yeah, you have an investment bias. It's a mental model. And so your brain's not gonna let you think you made a stupid decision. So people will fight that to the bone. Like I've lost friends over that. I've lost friends over the college thing. I lost the most friends over though an article I wrote on no war is ever really justified. And I said I don't know anything. I'm not a historian, but clearly, like you go back to the past 4 or 5 wars, they were ridiculous. And I'll even go as far as to say, why'd we do the Revolutionary War? Like clearly Canada didn't suffer because they didn't have a Revolutionary War. And somebody would start writing me, well, what about the Peloponnesian War? I'm like, I don't even know what that is. So clearly it doesn't matter to me. Yeah. But then I did lose friends. Like somebody called me up I realized I hadn't heard from a friend in a while. And I called him, I'm like, what's wrong? And he's like, you're obviously pro-slavery. And I'm like, what are you talking about? How can I be pro-slavery? And he said, you said no war can be justified. So that means the Civil War can't be justified. Well, slavery justifies it. And I said, you could have just called me and asked me if I think minorities should be slaves. Like clearly I don't. And I said, well, look at England got rid of slavery in 1831. Maybe if we hadn't done the Revolutionary War, there wouldn't be slavery because we would have been part of England. And I said, I don't know history. I just feel like when 20% of the country has died shooting each other and it's all 17-year-old kids, it's probably not the best idea. There maybe would have been another way to do it. But I said, I don't know. I just think kids shooting kids is a bad idea.
Well, 2 things. I mean, first of all, these friends that you've lost couldn't have been, great friends. If
that one was like a 20-year friendship. I was really surprised. But he was of Indian descent and took kind of personal offense.
I understand.
And I'm Jewish. I said, look, I don't think World War II should have happened.
Right. But this is like, to know you is to know that you're very much a provocateur in this sense. Like when I see, here's another crazy idea that James has been thinking about, it's like you put it out there. And I think there's perhaps slightly unconscious like glee that you get from like, let's see what happens with this.
Yeah, a little bit, but I don't say things, for instance, I don't blindly disbelieve. Like, there's enough research to basically connect the dots. Like the theory is first, it's probably not a good idea to send 18-year-olds to kill other 18-year-olds because bad things will happen. And then you have to look at, there's all sorts of ways to look at every war. But I also know history is written by not just the winners, but a very tiny percentage of the winners write history, and they kind of make the facts fit what happened. Now, all of these situations, obviously, everything was horrible. Who knows what the right solution was? War turned out to be the solution to some big catastrophic problems. But it's just a thought experiment. What if there was never a war? What would it be like? Less people would die. So
it's leveraging a couple of the mental models that Shane Parrish talks about. It's thought experiment, but it's also first order thinking. Like here's something we accept that's just kind of locked in our awareness as being true or just the way it should have been or should be or is, right? And you're saying, well, let's forget about that and look at it completely differently.
Yeah.
And then taking kind of a counterintuitive position on it.
Yeah, just a slight thing. We dropped the atomic bomb twice because the theory was that, and this is how history's been written, 1 million American lives would have been lost if we did a full-scale land invasion of Japan. I don't know if that's true. No one's ever told me how those numbers add up to 1 million. And also there was a lot of people arguing back then that maybe we should just contain Japan until they give up. They were already kind of almost giving up. And so it's very unclear what would happen.
Or why drop 2 bombs?
Yeah, why drop 2 bombs? They were literally about to capitulate. You can argue, nah, they were going to hold out. But we didn't need to invade them at that point. 1 million lives wouldn't have been lost. So who knows? You always have to question, why are people doing things in a certain way? There's got to be a backstory and a backstory to that and a flip story and all this stuff we have no clue about.
Right. All right. Well, we got to round this down, but let's talk a little bit before we end about your perspective on the biggest ways in which people get in their own way.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, let me ask you, like, What do you think is the biggest way you get in your own way? You've mentioned a couple. You feel imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. I'm insecure. I'm sitting here looking at you, but I'm thinking like, do I sound like a dummy? Like like what's the next question? Can I keep the momentum of this go? Like I get up in my own head, and I'm my own worst enemy.
By the way, it's really hard being a podcaster, right? You have to kind of always think of questions ahead.
That's when I said, "Wow, you're doing 4 of these a week." Like I've done Saturday, Tuesday, Wednesday. This is the 4th one that I've done in 5 or 6 days.
It's hard.
And I'm like tired,
yeah.
And I'm like, okay, but James is coming. Got to be on my game. So I can't imagine doing 4 every week. So that's
why I mix
stamina endurance contest in its own right. But in terms of how I get in my own way, like I think, I'm profoundly insecure. Like I have tools to keep those things at bay. And I'm very self-aware of a lot of these limitations, but they still infect my ability to, kind of optimize what I'm trying to accomplish.
I think you nailed it though with being self-aware and not necessarily, it's everybody could say, oh, you need to be more self-aware. And it's hard to do. You have to really be honest with what are my weaknesses? What are my strengths? So I know I have like huge weaknesses and psychological issues around, let's say, money. I've gone broke so many times. I'm like literally afraid to look at my bank account.
But you have this ability to create money as well.
Yeah, I've
done it many times. So it must be
because I lose it too.
If you lose it all, like you're like, yeah, but I figured this out so many times.
It's always a disaster every time though. So I'm knocking a lot on wood right now. But also, I think being aware of what you're interested in doing. So at one point, this is about a year ago, I was pitching a TV show and a network picked it up. And I thought to myself, this TV show idea is good, but do I really want to do it? This is going to take thousands of hours of time. I don't think I want to do it. And so knowing when your heart wants to do something, when your heart doesn't want to do something, I think is really important part of that self-awareness.
Was that like a narrative show or
No, it was like a kind of social experiment reality show. I'll tell you the idea since I'm totally not doing it. But I was going to take 6 random people off the street, and the premise of the show was if they followed my advice exactly, I would make them a millionaire within 6 months. So, but some would fail, some would succeed, someone would like beat me up or whatever, like typical reality show stuff. But I thought to myself, network's not really going to know if this is good until it's over, until I've done it. And what if it doesn't work? And it's just going to take a huge amount of time flying all around the country. They wanted people in every city, and they wanted more than 6. It's just they picked the best 6. So it'd be so much work, and I felt myself like afraid of doing that much work. So ultimately, it didn't happen. But I think also being aware of like what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do.
So the self-awareness piece in that is the understanding like this isn't really what I want to do, and then following that up with pulling the plug on it, even though it could be this huge, amazing opportunity.
Yeah, because look, if there's a lot of ways to go for making money. Making a TV show or doing a podcast or going into stand-up comedy or even being a writer, those are not ways to make a lot of money. You don't go into those thinking, man, I'm going to make billions now. Forget being a plumber. Now I'm going to be a podcaster. It's just going to start rolling in. That just doesn't happen. So I think a lot of it is about just being aware of what your capabilities are, what you really want to do versus what you don't want to do, understanding what skills you don't know. So somebody could say, I want to be an entrepreneur. Well, what's entrepreneurship? There's no skill called entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is this bag of other skills like sales, ideas, execution, marketing, motivation, leadership. There's all these other skills, and added together, it equals this. You could call it this one meta skill, entrepreneurship, but that's not really a skill. So understanding if you want to do something, what micro skills you need to learn. You have to avoid, in whatever you're doing, you have to avoid smoking your own crack. Like you could think, well, I'm doing this, so it must be great. And I see that all the time among entrepreneurs or even podcasters. I'm doing this idea. It must be the best idea in the world. Why aren't people coming to it? I'm going to have to advertise now. You should try to always ask if if you're smoking crack on your ideas, because I think that's a real easy bias also. That's a mental model as well.
Right. What do you think is your greatest strength? Like, what is the secret James Altucher sauce that has propelled you to this place?
I'm not sure, because I'm not so sure I've been propelled anywhere. But I think I have a lot of fun coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I've written about the most, is like I write down 10 ideas a day, and I realized kind of shortly after I started doing this that just writing 10 ideas a day, and it could be about anything. It could be about just 10 ideas for Valentine's Day gifts tomorrow, or 10 ideas that Google could do to be better. And they could all be bad ideas. But if you just kind of exercise this idea muscle, it really will get better. And if you don't exercise the idea muscle, it will atrophy. So the times when I was like losing all my money, I was letting my idea muscle atrophy, instead of no matter how bad things seemed, I started always exercising this idea muscle, writing 10 ideas a day down. Like I wrote ideas the other day for I wanted to make this card game. Again, it's an experiment, and I just wrote the rules, and that was my 10 ideas of the day. And so
of those ideas, how many of them do you take action on?
1 out of 1,000. So people will say, like, how do you keep track of the ideas, and how do you know which ones are going to be good? You never take action on them, because it's really just like, if you exercise by lifting weights, it's not like you think the next day, well, I don't have to lift today because I lifted really good weights yesterday.
Yeah,
it's just practice. And you'll know the good ones, because the next day you'll figure out 10 more ideas that are about that. It might be 10 execution ideas about one of the ideas from the day before, or a week before, or a month before. One
of the ones I heard you talking about recently was trying to pay for stuff with North Korean currency.
Oh yeah,
and Iranian currency.
Yeah, so I on a fluke, I wandered into this random auction house that had currency, and this guy had like this bag of money, like just it was like this old dusty store. You could picture it with all these garbage bags filled with stuff. And I started finding like North Korean currency, Saddam Hussein currency, Idi Amin currency. So there was all this like weird dictator money. And so I bought a bunch of it, and I started, I figured it'd be a fun idea to videotape me trying to pay for things. Like, hey, I go to buy a cup of coffee. Hey, I'm out of money, but I have this, Kim Jong-il currency. It's valid in North Korea. And nobody ever has taken the money. So
they won't even touch it, right?
Yeah, some people, it's weird. Some just, I think maybe they're afraid it's infected with something, or there's some poison. I have no idea. Like, why wouldn't you?
I think, well, if it's a gnarly dictator money, it almost feels like you're complicit in that regime if you touch it.
Yeah, or maybe.
And I think with a vendor, they think if they touch it, then that constitutes an agreement.
Or maybe also because there's like sanctions. Like we have sanctions against North Korea. Maybe if you're holding on to a bill from North Korea that's against the law.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone thinks about that. It is it is an interesting thing though.
Yeah, because I always ask people, why did you not touch it? And they're like, no, they specifically don't want to touch it.
But they probably don't have a good answer for why.
Yeah, they don't. Nobody has given me an answer.
Yeah.
They just don't want to. It like creeps them out.
What's the next crazy experiment? And then we'll finish this thing.
Well, there's a lot really. There's this Skip the Line book that's coming up. And
you're doing that with a traditional publisher.
Yeah, so almost an experiment to go mainstream.
It's like, what a crazy experiment. James is actually going to go the traditional route.
Well, I really wanted to see how things have changed in that world. And I think they have a little bit, but and everything I thought initially was that they rely on your marketing ability as well is true. So, but now everybody sort of knows the story. Like that's they know you have to do that, and you know you have to do it. And yeah, a lot of things I'm experimenting with. Like I've been playing around with doing this card game, and now I know how to do a Kickstarter because of Greenland. So I'm going to do a Kickstarter for this card game once I print up the first version of it. And that's just a fun thing. The key with an experiment is it shouldn't take up too much time or money. Another thing I've been doing is I've been putting what I call anti-ads on the backs of cabs in New York City. You ever go to New York City and you see on the back there's a little TV show and there's ads, and the ads will be for real products. So I've been creating these ads that don't advertise anything. So there's just like it was just like a picture of me saying hi. And they called me up. They called me up and they said, you have to put a URL, or don't you want to put a URL or a Twitter handle or something? And I'm like, no, that's the whole point. No URL, no Twitter handle.
That's like performance art.
Yeah, it's a little like that. And I kind of want to see what happens though. Like, does it? And I've had at least one instance, because I did this for a couple of months, or I'm doing this for a couple of months, and one guy now did come up to me last week, and he's like, you're that Taxi TV guy. My 9-year-old loves you. And he took a selfie with me. He didn't know my name. He didn't know
anything other than you said hi and a little sticker.
Yeah, and the Taxi TV people said, we can't run this, because originally it didn't even have hi on it. And they said, we can't run this.
Just a picture of your face?
Yeah, it was just a picture of my face. And by the way, it was really like, I was wearing a white t-shirt and I was standing next to a white background. So it was the worst possible way to structure a photo. And the Taxi TV people said, we have to have a certain bar. We have, professional advertisers advertising on this. We can't run this. So they made me put, and they had a good idea, I can't say they made me, but they said, make it a little bit of a story. So I put hi on the first one and like hi again on the second one. And I forget what we put on the third one, like a math puzzle or something. But so that's an experiment. And I have like 20
So those are up in New York right now, cruising around?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I have like 20 of these experiments going on, these different types of things like this that all seem small. And, also working on another TV show, which would be much less work, and experimenting with the format of the podcast. And it's just things I do all the time to figure out, okay, if it doesn't take time or that much money, I can do it. And so I do it.
I love it. And I love you. You're fantastic. I love the work that you do. And you know what? Let me just say this. You look great and you seem really happy. And that makes me happy to see.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah. I've been, I wish I could say I've been living your healthy lifestyle, but
I know you've taken stabs at it.
Yeah, I've taken stabs. I remember one time you visited me and you were talking, and my daughter, my red-haired daughter, was about to turn full vegan. And I think listening to you actually put her over the edge. Like she was just like sitting there like wrapped while you were talking. And now she's been like literally a vegan ever since. It's almost 4 years later.
I love it.
So at least she's living that lifestyle, but I try to be healthy.
Well, we're working. This is perhaps a new experiment for you.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Could be.
All right, man. Well, to be continued.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Rich, as always. And I look forward to our next get together on the air.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Cool. Peace.